Hey everybody, and welcome to the Sorting Hat Podcast, the show where everything and anything can and will be sorted. I, as always, am your host, Michael Barryte, joined by my co-host, Brice.
They're all gonna laugh at you, Michael.
Oh.
They're all going to laugh at you. And your dirty pillows.
Solid call out. The basic conceit of the show is that we have a fan or expert who is passionate about a subject, and then we sort things within that category into the various houses of Hogwarts. Today, we are joined by Abby Wilde, who is both actor of stage and screen. You would probably be most familiar with her work from playing the character of Stacey Dilson on Zoey 101, although she also had some carryover into iCarly and also one episode of Sam and Cat.
What?
She's also served as a columnist for Bitter Lemons LA and was a co-host, correct, on the Pith Moment podcast.
That is correct, Michael.
You have a
Barryte.
lot of accolades to your name.
I'm very special and important.
I'd say most importantly, she did college Shakespeare with me, so...
I did college Shakespeare and college Sherlock Holmes with Reed.
Ooh.
We did Richard III, in which I played Richard III. We did Sherlock Holmes, in which I played Sherlock Holmes.
I played minor characters in both.
And my one regret is that we didn't do My Fair Lady, so I could have got my trifecta of upper middle class British male sociopath. It would have been so good.
I would do a production with you tomorrow of that show.
So good.
How Rex Harrington would you have played it?
I wouldn't be Rex Harrington at all, but I would be Rex Harrison.
There
Michael
we
Barryte.
go.
Michael Barryte.
Oh!
For everyone listening out there, I literally met Michael like 8 minutes ago.
Oh, don't worry. I'm going to cut this out.
An interesting thing about that is it would be very difficult, as the score exists now, to do it not in a Rex Harrison way, because they actually had to reorchestrate it for him because they didn't know he couldn't sing when he was
Is
cast.
that true?
Yes.
I had
Absolutely
no
true.
idea.
Yeah, it was a completely different.
I can't imagine
professor.
that music written with actual music in it at all.
If you are under 50, he's an actor who mostly just spoke song and still managed to have one of the most iconic singing voices from it.
He also played an amazing ghost of an irascible romantic sea captain in The Ghost and Mrs. Muir.
Oh man,
I recommend
He's
you all rent it.
incredible.
He's the best.
The Ghost and Mrs. Muir is one of my favorite films of all
Get
time.
out of town. I know literally 2 people who have seen it, and one of them was the person who introduced the other one and me to the movie.
I've seen it 3 times.
Wow.
Like
Get out.
probably in the past 2 or 3 years.
now it has the word ghost in it. I'm gonna guess that's also a Stephen King book.
Little known
No.
fact, it is not.
All right,
and-
well, I
and
was just doing a
young-
terrible segue.
Young Natalie Wood is in that, and Gene Tierney is fantastic in it.
She's pretty good. And George Sanders of All About Eve fame plays George Sanders in everything. He's the smarmy boyfriend, children's author dude. He always plays that character in everything. I love.
Now that I think about it, yeah. I mean,
And he's in Rebecca as the same dude.
now we're just going down classic
Should we start
film
again?
paths.
Let's start
Welcome
again.
to Turner Classic Movie Stock, where
yeah.
nothing ever is in color.
Anyway, we're gonna get way off topic.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
because
that's
you brought us here to talk about the king, baby.
I
Yes.
brought you here to talk about my Lord and Savior, Stephen King. I read my first Stephen King novel when I was 13 because my eldest brother, who at the time was the cool brother, was reading Stephen King. And my first Stephen King novel was The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon, which is a deep cut. And I never looked back.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that one is.
That one is about a girl who goes on a hike with her recently divorced mom and her brother, and she gets lost. She gets separated from them. And literally the rest of the novel is her trying to find her way back to civilization. And it cuts back and forth between like her and her mom and her brother trying to find her. But as she runs out of food and is out on a mountainside for a week, she starts to hallucinate. And the whole
Oh, boy.
conceit is you don't know how much of it is in her head and how much of it is real paranormal stuff happening.
Ooh.
you got a fun, unreliable narrator.
You've got a fun, unreliable narrator.
I feel like that's like a constant theme in a lot of King's work is like not knowing quite where insanity ends and
Totally.
the actual paranormal begins.
No, I would totally go with that. And another big theme of it is that he writes a lot about children. He's really good what I love about the way he writes children is that he writes them as adults who think about different things.
And do you think that maybe he uses that device because there's a built-in vulnerability to being a child, or
I
in
think
that,
so.
or that there's built-in honesty to being a child?
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought of it that way. I always think of it more as, I think we all kind of think of ourselves as frozen at who we were when we were a certain age. Like, sometimes I look in the mirror and I think I'm 28, but most of the time I still feel like 14-year-old me.
Oh,
Mhm.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so frequently you're stumbling through life and you're like, they don't realize that I don't realize what's going on.
Pretty
Yeah, man.
much.
But like the form which I am like embodying right now needs to at least like suggest that I know what's going on.
Yeah.
Totally. And his children are like, they capture that essence of when you're a smart, precocious kid and you know more than everybody thinks you know, but no one will trust you because you're a child. Like, if you're the kid and you see the monster and you know the monster is real, who can you tell?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, for sure.
It is inherently more vulnerable read.
And it's worth noting, while we started to somewhat talk about one of the novels that we may very well be sorting, we are going to be dealing with spoilers.
So many spoilers.
And these are specifically the novels of Stephen King. So if you were expecting us to be talking on Shawshank Redemption or Stand By Me or any of the movies that have been adapted,
The dog
those
does
are
have
novellas,
rabies.
correct? Those are
Those were novellas. Shawshank Redemption and Stand By Me were originally novellas called Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption and The Body, both originally published in different seasons.
I teed you up based off of a text conversation we had prior to this
They were
recording.
both
Guys,
real
we've been-
stoked, yeah.
We've been texting so hard about Stephen King. It's been delightful.
And as also discussed previous to the pod recording, I've not read any Stephen King.
No Stephen King at all?
Oh, you didn't get
No,
that
you said
from-
no Green Mile. You didn't say any Stephen King at all.
Yes, I've not read any Stephen King because I have the terrible tendency of going for the largest book and then getting like a third of the way through and just
Dude.
being intimidated by the page count and then getting distracted by another book.
I sympathize so much and I applaud your tenacity, but that's the wrong way to read.
No, I understand
Okay.
that, but I've also been very dumb about some books. Like I forced myself to read all of Moby Dick, and
Moby Dick is my favorite book. I literally read it twice in a row.
Whoa.
I don't understand who you are in this moment.
We'll talk about it after the pod.
No. We're talking about this
Y'all are
right
soulmates.
fucking
So
now.
here's why Moby Dick is amazing.
All right, I can give you that the story is great. The narrative is wonderful, but the minute that Melville starts writing about like the anatomy of the whale or the architecture
in
of
the
the ship,
ultimate moments of that book, when the shit is literally and figuratively coming down, all of that knowledge he has force-fed into your mouth from the beginning to the end of that book becomes immediately relevant and informs the exact depth of the tragedy that ends that book. It is brilliant gaslighty suspense, and I love it.
yeah, I really don't feel that you need to know how a ship fully operates and is built.
Is that the whale one?
Yes.
It's the one with the whales. The whale that's named after a body.
I just want everyone
you
to
were
not worry
just-
that I left.
The best part was I saw you just like getting the driest smile, being like, I'm
I
going to
got a
say
good one.
something real
I got a
dumb
good one.
right now.
It's gonna be good.
That's what the
yeah,
people want.
I have to play to that character.
Yeah,
So-
the character of Reed is dumb, not actual Reed.
No. It's all a facade.
Where do we want to begin?
Oh,
He has like a very
should we
large
start?
oeuvre.
Let's start chronologically.
that would be Carrie, right?
Carrie. So Carrie was the first novel that Stephen King had published. It was, I think I read somewhere, the third novel he'd written. And it actually almost never made it out the door because at the time, picture this. He and his wife, Tabitha King, living in a trailer. She's working at Dunkin' Donuts. He's working as an English teacher by day and in an industrial laundry by night.
Oh my goodness.
They have 2 babies. And in all of his spare time, he sits at a rickety card table in the middle of the trailer and writes his stuff and sends it out on a typewriter with a malfunctioning N. He wrote 3 pages of Carrie because he'd received feedback from one of the editors he submitted to that he, because he'd had some short stories published, that he wrote all of these great macho manly short stories, but he never wrote any women. So he wrote the first 3 pages of Carrie, hated it, threw it out. His wife found it and said, no, you should write this one. I'll help you if you get like confused about how women are, but you should write this book. So he did. And it was accepted. It was published. He received like something like a $2,000 advance, like right when his child had an ear infection, and like it was Dickensian. His child had an ear infection and had to go to the hospital, and they had no money. They had disconnected their phone because they couldn't afford to pay for it. So he literally found out by telegram.
That's wild. I hope I find out anything in my life via telegram.
Right? Don't you think like all of the most urgent news of your life should be delivered via like a guy in a newsboy hat who runs up to the step and hands you a telegram and says, Western Union, ma'am, or sir, or folk? I don't know.
They definitely wouldn't have said folk back then.
Fellow?
And they probably would have like intimated what my ethnic background was.
The main thing that I took away from that story is that, hey guys, listen to your wives.
Pretty much.
That should just be the advice that everybody has all the time in their mind.
What's funny about this is that basically the same thing happened to Robert Louis Stevenson when he wrote Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. He, except that he was the one who was sick. He had a terrible fever. He wrote this story. He read it to his wife. And his wife said, this is a brilliant story, but you've written a horror story, and this is actually an allegory for the state of man. Rewrite it, please.
Is there just a documentary about all the times that famous men have been saved by women? Because, like, the same is true for, like, George Lucas with Star Wars.
Is it
like,
really?
Marcia Lucas was the editor on Star Wars. She
female editors on films is a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole wash.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing.
If we properly gave credit the first time around, that'd probably be most of history.
Behind every strong man is a smarter woman who's able to say it more concisely.
With that said, we haven't really talked about Carrie, but the backstory of. I think many are familiar with the imagery of Carrie, more notably the De Palma film.
Definitely.
Than even the more recent one with what's her name?
Chloe Grace Moretz.
Yes.
Yeah. I actually haven't seen that one.
I haven't either. And Julianne Moore, I believe, is her mom.
Oh, that's right. She is. Oh, I really need to see it. Nothing on Chloe Grace Moretz, but Julianne Moore is my Lord and Savior.
She's great.
I'll just say, like, it might be still worth watching, but I was very disappointed because it was done by Kimberly Pierce, who did Boys Don't Cry and is a very well-known queer director. And I felt like it was just so ripe to really put in some like effusive commentary, not only on, femininity and like what feminism means today, but also like school violence and stuff like that. And I don't know, it was just really underwhelming and felt like it was very much like banking on the name alone.
I would
doing the work.
Be surprised that Hollywood would ever bank on a franchise in it of like that alone would.
I actually wrote my college application essay about the De Palma film.
Get out of town.
And that it was actually like a feminist call to arms and manifesto about not being afraid of burgeoning sexuality and being cognizant of how it will both be weaponized against you and how you can, in some cases, utilize it to your own advantage.
That's fantastic because I feel like that's what the book sets out to do. But it and with the caveat, it's been at least 6 or 7 years since I last read the book. I feel like it sets out to be a feminist manifesto, but given that it's written by a young man, the sense of reading it is it feels very much like this is how a man thinks teenage girls talk to each other.
Oh, for sure. From what little I've read of the book, it's definitely not the most naturalistic in its dialogue, especially for young women, unless like the times have just changed so much.
It's semi-epistolary. It's partly presented in straight like third person narration and then partly in shifting POV narration where I think it gets weak. And then partly in snippets of news stories and letters and journal entries, which I think is the best writing in the book, kind of in the same way Dracula is written. And it shifts between, we hear from Carrie, we hear from, I should probably at some point tell you basically how the plot unfolds.
Oh yeah, if you haven't watched it or heard it.
So it starts with Carrie White. She's 16 or 17. She's a high school student. She's in the showers after gym. This is the 70s, so all of the girls shower naked together after gym, which I don't know about you people. I never did in public school. And her period starts, and she has no idea what it is because her mother, we will come to find out, is a freaky evangelical, super conservative. I hesitate to say Christian because I don't want to offend actual Christians. She's just a biblical whack job.
Yeah.
So Carrie doesn't know what's happening. She freaks out. She runs to the other girls for help. It quickly becomes apparent that Carrie is the school pariah, and everybody hates her under the best of circumstances. So now all of the girls think it's hilarious that she thinks she's bleeding to death. They think it's delightful, and they start throwing tampons at her and screaming, "Plug it up, plug it up, plug it up." She freaks out and a light bulb shatters over her head, which is how she figures out, aha, I am Freaky Matilda. Meanwhile, the ringleader of the Angry Girls is sentenced to week-long grueling detention, or else she can't go to prom, which she is incensed by, and she vows revenge. And a third girl, Sue, who was kind of like hanging out with the mean girls, but wasn't really saying anything, but wasn't really telling them not to say anything, feels bad. So she decides, I will become Carrie's friend, and here's how I will do it. I will have my boyfriend Tommy ask her to the prom. That is a normal thing that teenage girls definitely do all the time. I love Stephen King, but I am so baffled by this plot device because I cannot imagine that being a sensible thing to do, to offer someone your boyfriend. I don't think
it is in any scenario, whether there is nefarious intent or not.
And Sue has the purest intent at this point. She is like pure, I'm going to make this right. This girl has never been loved or accepted or made to feel special. I will have my boyfriend, who is delightful and wonderful and handsome, take her to the prom.
But in case you haven't gathered, dear listeners, things don't go according to plan in any regard.
No, Chris Hargensen, the mean girl who swore revenge, decides that she's not going to go through with her detention so she can go to prom, which would be the sensible thing to do. She and her boyfriend, whose name is Billy, and who was played by John Travolta in the Brian De Palma film, decide that they are going to set Carrie up. Carrie goes to prom. They stuff the ballot box so that she and Tommy are crowned prom king and prom queen. And then, while they are standing on the platform in front of everybody, and it's this beautiful pageantry moment, Chris and Billy empty buckets of pig's blood on top of both of them from the flies above the stage. In the book, one of the buckets falls and actually kills Tommy. Doesn't really happen in the movie, I don't think.
I bet they probably shot that and then couldn't figure out a way to not make it look like slapstick.
Pretty much, or not to or to make it obvious without having someone go, "Oh my God, I think he's dead."
Yeah,
I truly don't remember if that happens in the movie or not.
I don't remember either. I think I would remember because that sounds like it wouldn't play well on film.
Probably.
If we're wrong, let us know.
I don't know. Anyway, Carrie, pretty sympathetically, it believes that takes this all to mean that this entire thing, all the way down to Sue asking Tommy to ask her to the prom, was all a setup to humiliate her for this moment. Her mother was right. Her mother had told her they were all going to laugh at her, and lo, they are all laughing at her. So she decides to fuck shit up. And she uses her telekinetic powers to lock the gym, break some power cords, set everything on fire, and electrocute everyone to death.
Yeah, and it's like one of the worst massacres in American history. Yeah, this book rules.
It's really in the book that it ends with a news clipping about the Black Prom and how it was the worst massacre in Chamberlain, Maine history. It's wonderful.
There's a whole bunch of stuff about school violence now, but there's nothing at the time really about that had this sort of subject matter in it, let alone letting a precocious young white woman do it in the 70s. So this book ended up being one of the most banned books in American high schools.
Is it really?
Yeah,
I had no idea.
It ends up it lands on the they do not put in the library list more often than any other. Along with
I would have to assume though that go on. Adults wouldn't be able to make the distinction between something that is clearly a work of fiction. She has telekinetic powers. Everything that she does would require so much orchestration that is impossible for teenagers to pull off.
Sure. I mean, I get Look, I'm never going to be in favor of banning books ever, ever, ever. I do understand the mindset that would get you to think, I don't want kids to think that the solution to their problems is killing everybody.
Oh,
Sure.
and you
That's
know what?
fair.
I would agree with you, but I have a hunch that's not why. Because we let kids see all kinds of violence. I'm pretty sure it was about the burgeoning sexuality of a woman.
Oh, I
in
was
the
thinking that
70s.
it might have been the religious angle.
There's a lot of sex and religion and
Yeah,
school
I would say-
massacre.
I would
Like, I
say-
think those two would probably outweigh the
Yeah.
violence.
Because, like, even looking at it on face value, this is a woman who only comes into her own the moment she gets her period. There's something even about, like, not even talking about bodily fluids. People are
Mhm.
so uncomfortable about even, like, discussing periods openly. That's
And-
why almost every woman you know is a sleight of hand magician.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and like, you never see tampons except on the store shelves, and men don't even want to go down those aisles.
No, totally. I read an article the other day about this it was I'm an advice column junkie. It was an advice letter from this woman who was like, I don't know how to discuss with my boyfriend and I went to this party at this girl's apartment, and in her apartment she had an open bowl of courtesy tampons and pads in case anyone needed them. And he was so disgusted. It was all he could talk about all the way home. And I feel really uncomfortable about
Yeah.
this. How should I address it? To which the correct response is dump his ass. He's not comfortable with your body.
I would have put a bowl out in our house immediately.
Yeah, put out a bowl of like, I feel like this is your litmus test. If you bring
Yeah.
a guy home, put out a bowl of tampons and just see what he says. And if he freaks out, don't fuck him.
Yeah, because, like, okay, here's the thing.
Yes.
You don't have to love menstruation so much that you're like, hell yeah, I wanna like see all of this refuse and stuff like that.
I don't
But
think
then-
anybody loves
But I
menstruation.
don't men
They were bowls of used
Yeah.
tampons.
Right,
But-
I'm like, as the outside male looking in right now on this situation, but I suppose my reaction to most things that people get upset about is, so what? Like,
yeah, that's true.
it doesn't really affect, like,
Yeah.
I'm thrown just by someone being so fixated on such a thing that has
Totally.
little to no effect on them.
So you could say that the moral of the story is teach your daughters about their bodies.
Yeah.
So that when they start bleeding in the middle of gym class, they go, aha, here is a natural transition.
Yeah, there's
I
a
have
sex
expected from
education
many years."
lesson
Yeah,
that we're
There's such a sex
And the
education.
feminist angle that I see here is when you really try to repress that power and that strength in sexuality and just like in womanhood and femininity, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy that you might have somebody who ends up being self-destructive from it instead of
Mhm.
being able to harness it properly. And that's why I think it's a really important work, not necessarily in that it's like the best of his writing,
Sure.
but just that I there aren't too many examples from before it, especially utilizing the horror genre, which is like a more accessible vehicle for people in most cases to understand like these heightened emotions of more nuanced subject matter.
Mhm.
And with that said,
So I thought that this would be sortable as Hufflepuff, and I'll tell you why.
sure.
I think that there are a lot of Hufflepuffs going around here.
Mhm.
Sue Snell and her whole "I will solve everything by giving her my boyfriend" thing, like
Most
that feels
Hufflepuff move of all
so
time.
Hufflepuff.
Yeah.
So like, I'm gonna be so kind to her. I will literally give her my boyfriend. That's pretty Hufflepuff. In the book, Carrie is depicted as being the way she's depicted with the same derogatory terms that people use derogatorily towards Hufflepuffs, as being slow and not particularly bright. And she kind of, I feel like this whole thing is kind of unleashed by an emotional reaction. It's not a reaction of courage. It's not a reaction of cunning.
Mhm.
It's not a reaction of learning. It's the antithesis of learning. I feel like she defaults into Hufflepuff.
Yeah. No, yeah, and then like even though like everything is so dramatic in terms of like every decision that a character makes is like at a 7 bare minimum. Like,
But I feel that those elements might attribute to making the book either a Gryffindor or a Slytherin in nature, because while, yes, we have characters who are conflict averse, which would make them leaning towards either Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw,
Mhm.
the acts themselves are bold, brash, and calling attention to in a very mean-spirited way. Now, the thematics around it could argue differently, but I'm thinking if you just go to the gym, the referencing initially like her being the pariah of school, it's very singling out, that makes me think Slytherin.
That is pretty Slytherin-y. Yeah, I guess you could, but
what, like, I guess taking, like, when we were discussing Shakespearean dramas as a good callback,
Sure.
if you guys haven't listened to that, check that out. When we found that usually our conclusions or our thematics were the thing that would help us best.
In the conclusion of this book, spoilers, everyone, Carrie destroys the gym and everybody in it. She walks down the road and destroys the entire town as she goes down. She goes to the roadhouse where Billy and Chris are hiding out and kills them. And then, having done that, she also goes home and kills her mother. She kills basically everyone except Sue, because she lies down in the middle of the road to die. And Sue, who has manifested some sort of a psychic link with Carrie, because girl talk, sits
Y'all
down
ever
with
have
her.
a telekinetic conversation with your bestie? After
You know
just
how it is.
After you murder a whole town?
And you sitting there in the middle of the road and y'all look at each other like, I've got nowhere
You
to go.
want to go get some chicken nuggets? Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't know when Stephen King thinks teenage girls
But there
are up
always
to.
has to be a final girl. I don't know if that trope had even been established at that point. But
Sue is the final girl.
Even with a female and like I don't even care. Carrie would be the protagonist, right?
She's both the protagonist and her mother is the antagonist. She's the protagonist.
Yeah.
I would say that the antagonist role sort of rolls from mother to daughter.
It definitely does. Chris is definitely an antagonist. Margaret, the mother, definitely an antagonist. Carrie, but I think it just defies that kind of traditional categorization.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like if anything, it's like these girls trying to survive being teens versus like the rest of their environment.
One
It's the
could say
easiest way
that
I
the
could say.
true antagonist is society.
Yeah, it's the damn patriarchy, like
Curse
usual.
the man.
I would even say I always like to consider the context of like what you were discussing. Like this book literally rose from the ashes. Like Stephen King literally tried to throw this story away. So I would say,
So
like,
you going Gryffindor on this?
Going Gryffindor.
I think that can also apply to Slytherins. I think just as much like Slytherins.
Oh well, I see the Gryffindor angle
of like it being like a redemption story and
both a redemption story, but also the actions themselves were far less. Well, the act in the gym was calculated, but I think the rest of it was just like, I went too far. Like now I just have to burn it all down. And
But then it ends with Sue and Carrie alone on the road, and Carrie is dying. I think the way they explain it is that like her heart bursts from the effort or something, while Sue is telepathically linked with her and experiences the death with her, but is there with her as her one and only friend and like her last. So,
which is
I'm not gonna
compassion
say-
and Gryffindors are not dissimilar.
Not
this is off topic, but have you both finished the new season of Black Mirror?
No, I haven't even
Well,
started.
You know what? There's a parallel to something that was said, and now you have to watch Black Mirror to know
Here's
what that is.
my
Okay.
stance on Black Mirror. I watched the first season of Black Mirror,
So good, right?
and I felt awful
I
afterwards.
know, isn't it a
was
great feeling?
I was gutted.
He gets secondhand anxiety for films.
I really
Yeah.
do. Like I started.
We watched The Green Room together, and we were both gonna die.
I couldn't finish Green Room.
I started watching the second episode of the first season of Black Mirror, and halfway through I needed to stop because I knew it wasn't going to end well. And then about a year and a half later, I was able to watch it with people and still was like, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be.
But you had
there there was a good period because I didn't even get to her audition.
Sure.
And I was like losing my mind. So then I got to that point and was like ruined.
Black
Oh,
Mirror is my
man.
favorite, one of my favorite franchises of
it's so good.
of this entire decade. So
It's the modern Twilight Zone.
I would agree. I would agree. Like it's really hard, and I can't say for sure yet if it's going to age as well as the Twilight Zone has.
Mhm.
But I will say that it is actually trying to put forward the kind of challenging social commentary that the Twilight Zone was trying to do for its time.
And I know I need to give it a shot, and I know I need to just like hunker down and do it. But we've spent almost 30 minutes on Carrie and introductions.
I didn't even want to talk about this book. This was a last minute one.
Which is the funny part, because I knew this is where we were going to start. But I'm already just going to casually put out, hey, are you, like, do you have anywhere to be?
Nope.
Great, then we're making this a two-parter.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
So we're going to carry on, and at some point we're going to drop off and then move on to the next thing. So what would you like to move on into from Carrie?
I think that the next one would be my very favorite Stephen King novel. Like, if I had to pick only one Stephen King novel that I could read for the rest of my life, it would be It. It.
Fantastic.
Never heard of it.
I know, right?
Shut up, Reed.
That was so bad. That might be the worst joke that I'll make this year, and it's only January, and I take my own challenge.
I have faith in you. You can make worse jokes. You can make worse jokes, Reed.
All right, so if you haven't been paying attention for like the last year or like forever, what is it about?
It is an 1,100-page masterpiece, almost, except for a couple of really ill-advised scenes.
I know which ones you're talking about.
Exactly which ones I'm talking
And
about.
I've not even read it.
I know, but if you, we'll get to that. Maybe we'll get to that. Maybe we'll go the way that all the cinematic adaptations go and not get to that at all.
Gloss right over, baby.
So it is a novel about a fictional town in Maine. Most of Stephen King's books are set in Maine, mostly in fictional towns, because he grew up there. And
in fictional towns?
He
That's
grew up
wild.
in fictional towns. That explains a lot,
Lovecraft
right?
said a lot of stuff there too, right? Is it just like
Not in Maine, but in New England, definitely.
in New England, definitely. Okay,
It's the fog. The fog or the mist.
or do you,
There's,
or do you think
I
that's
might not have read it, but I know about it.
You need to earn that. You need to earn that, and you need to go read some Stephen King, and
Abby
then you
got
can come to me and
like,
talk about the
There's
mist.
fire in her eyes.
Look, I just met you 37 minutes ago, but I am throwing down. It is a book about a small town in Maine that is haunted by an evil clown. It's not an evil clown. It's much bigger and deeper and, dare I say, more Lovecraftian than an evil clown, but its preferred face is that of an evil clown called Pennywise. The book exists in two different time frames. One is in the 1950s, one in the 1980s. They are, I want to say 28 years apart.
I think it's 27 if the movie told me correctly.
Well, look at you, Michael Barryte. It is 27 years. Pennywise, I should say, arises every 27 years.
Is there a
to feed
reason
on this
for
town.
that? 27?
No, I don't think so. I think the reason I having done little to no research into why, because this is one of those books that I don't want to look too far behind the scenes
No,
on,
that's totally
right?
fine.
I would guess that it would be because Stephen King wanted to write about his present and his childhood at the same time.
That works out
Right?
nicely.
Right?
I definitely was like, what is the significance of 27? And I was like, maybe nope, it's not a prime number. Like, is there some numerology or like Kabbalic?
I thought about that too. It's 9 times 3, which are both like pretty powerful numbers that are used a lot. Right? Sure. And 2 plus 7 is 9, which is divisible by 3.
And if you flip them over and complete them together, they become the number 23, the Jim Carrey film, not based on anything from Stephen King.
Oh my God, sideline. Did either of you see Jim and Andy yet?
Oh,
I did,
hell
and
yeah.
I thoroughly didn't enjoy it.
I didn't either.
Thank you.
We're going to talk about that later.
No, we're talking about it now.
Jim Carrey is nuts.
Yes,
I was so uncomfortable.
Now here's I had not seen.
I can't breathe. This
I
is
had
great.
not seen Man in the Moon. I
No,
still
me
haven't.
neither.
Okay, so
Okay,
maybe
good,
that's the
we're on the same
reason.
page.
Okay, well that
Now-
probably
I don't
changed
care.
a lot.
Have you seen it, Reed?
Okay, that film was a seminal moment for me as a child because that was my
Okay.
introduction to Andy Kaufman, and I already liked Jim Carrey quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that film actually changed the way I even processed
I'd
comedy.
seen a bunch of Andy Kaufman sketches. I hadn't watched like him in Taxi per se, but I'd seen bits and pieces of him, not the movie, but like I guess I just don't have any real connection or appreciation of him.
It was like having a light turned on in a room in your house that you never knew existed before, where I always knew that my favorite jokes weren't even necessarily the ones that everyone even understood that I said. Like to this day, it still continues that I have to like explain why my joke even made me laugh, or my
Sure.
pitches sometimes are like 10 seconds of me saying the actual thing and then having to explain why it's funny. And So seeing somebody who didn't even care if the audience knew what was going on was revelatory to me.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I have to give Andy Kaufman mad props for being like, I am doing my own thing, and the world is going to recognize me for like this thing.
And like I am way more critical of him now because I'm an adult and not a child. I'm more critical of his work. I still think it's very important, but there were certain things. I did not know that Jim Carrey was in character for the entire film, and I will give you my conspiracy theory about this.
Oh God.
I think it's a hoax. I think the documentary was a hoax.
Really?
It just happens that he got Zamuda and was it Kaufman's wife to be involved in the film? They just happened to be the ones who were filming the documentary. And this is a lot. This is like a decades-long documentary. It just happens that Paramount
Yeah,
didn't want anyone to see behind-the-scenes footage because they thought it would ruin the movie. I think it was all very, very convenient, and then I think they sat on that footage on purpose as a prank, so that Jim Carrey could then go and pretend to be. In his eyes, he even at one point goes, "Wouldn't it be great if I just sat up here for like an hour and pretended I was Jesus?"
I know. It was horrifying.
No, and
he thinks he could be Jesus.
part of me knows that there, like that part of it has a kernel of truth to it.
Well,
that
yeah,
he thinks that he could
if
get away
you've
with
seen Jim Carrey on the Norm Macdonald podcast, everything that he's saying, unless he has assumed this character of Jim Carrey that believes these things, he like it's hard to. It's
and
weird.
also he basically made a woman kill herself. You know that, right?
No.
It's really heavy. This is really heavy, but we're already talking about like murder and horror and stuff. So his girlfriend contracted STDs from him.
Jim Carrey's girlfriend.
And then went to him and went, "I'm having these symptoms," and he went, "Oh, it's probably nothing." And then later she was like, "Oh no, I got STDs from you." And then as far as I know, like he like dumped her, and then she ended up committing suicide, and her family took him to court over it.
Oh my God.
So like he is not a good dude. So like all of that shit that he pulled is like a drop in the bucket as far as I'm concerned.
Independent of that, I was for some reason when I watched it, the documentary.
Yes.
There was a part of me that was like, what did you do, Jim Carrey, that is requiring you to like put this out right now? Like why? Like the timing is suspect, and I just am like, are you doing this so you're in our good graces because there's some element that we don't know about?
What, because of the Harvey Weinstein zeitgeist?
Something like that. It just strikes me very weird that they just sat on footage for so long.
Yeah.
Or like they were going to release it anyway, and Jim Carrey was like, I need to control the narrative. So like you're going to sit down and talk to me for, however many hours.
I just don't believe the narrative as it was put out by the film.
Mm-hmm.
No,
That
definitely.
the studio didn't want it to be seen, because that just is too
Well,
perfect.
I don't know. I mean, there might be a lot in that footage that didn't make it into the documentary for reasons Michael's hinting at, that they could have been sitting on that footage because it implicated them in the way that people were treated on set by Jim Carrey, which
Yeah.
they
that
would
wouldn't
be
surprise
legally
me at
culpable
all.
for.
Yeah, no, and like
that would be a great reason for them to sit on it, is that there's evidence of Jim Carrey mistreating people on their onus, and they would be legally responsible.
And that's something that they would be afraid of, and that fear would feed it.
Are we segueing back to Stephen King?
Every now and again, I force one.
We're never good
so
at it.
subtle.
You say every now and again, like that's not how we do it every time.
Tangents happen. I mean, the worst part is when I get deep into the tangents as well, and then have to be the guy who's like, all right, stop goofing off. Stop goofing off.
You were the one who was like, we've got to talk about Jim Carrey
I know,
right
because
now.
here's the thing. If we don't talk about it, Lord, when am I going to see you again? You go back to New York.
I know.
Yeah. So let's run through like the first and second times.
So you have the first cycle begins in the 1950s with the death of a small boy named Georgie Denborough, this is the boy who is floating his paper boat down a rushing storm gutter. It falls into a storm drain. He looks into the storm drain, and there is a clown in the storm drain who says, "Come down here and play with me, Georgie." And then he reaches up and rips the poor boy's arm off. Then we jump 27 years in the future and see the second cycle, starting with the death of, this is problematic, the death of a grown-ass man who happens to be gay. And except for this man, everyone else that it preys on is a child. And it says at one point in the book that, like, it excuses the death of Adrian Mellon with, well, he was childlike. And I don't know what that means.
Oh, that's weird. That's not in any of the movies, is it?
It's not. No, the death of, I don't know. It might be in the 1980s one. It's definitely not in the one that just came out.
Well, because the one that just came out is just set
the
for
children.
the children so far, but the next chapter is like them as adults.
So the gay guy dies in the in the later part?
In the later part.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
27.
Yes.
So
he sets off the cycle in the later part.
we might be due for a gay death.
I guess.
Gay death.
Like, the problem is not he dies and he's gay. It's that he's gay and he's childlike, and that is framed in the book.
And he's the only adult
He's the only adult
in the whole story of it.
In the whole story of it, he's the only adult independent of the central characters, because when the central characters become grown-ups and they come back to fight it again in the second cycle, they start coming under the attack of it.
Because usually, isn't it the way it works is like adults just forget that it exists, but like kids
and you
seem
know
to
what?
know about it?
I take it back, because there's this wonderful function of Adrian Mellon is the only individual who is killed in the same way that the individual children are killed. And there's a high preponderance of child murder in Derry, Maine, all the time, but especially in these cycles every 27 years. However, one of the characters, Mike Hanlon, town librarian, town historian, does, and this is another book that jumps around perspective, so you get to see a lot of stuff from his notebooks where he's gathering the history of it and all of these 27-year cycles.
I'm understanding more and more why you liked Moby Dick.
Right?
Anytime that you're like, let's dive into the notes.
The notes! Oh, they're so good. But there are, sometimes the 27-year cycle is child massacre or the explosion of an ironworks on an Easter egg hunt that kills several children. Sometimes it is the entire town turning out to slaughter some outlaws that just happened to be passing through. So you know what? It is not constrained to children, and I take it back. It is not necessarily.
But just in the purpose of this particular story, we're almost exclusively seing child murders.
Child murders. Yes.
I can understand why you would King would use that kind of character, though, because up until like even a while ago, being gay was like at least good enough explanation. They're like, okay, now I understand, but I understand why that person died. It was like it's a weird, and maybe you don't pick up on it as easily if you're not queer, but it usually is like that is just even for the characters themselves, not necessarily for how the audience should perceive it or even what the author intended, but oftentimes it's just the plot device is like, that's all you need.
And it's pointed at that way in the book in a very meta-narrative way, because when he dies, he's what happens is he's thrown over a bridge by like 3 or 4 homophobic teenagers. Mm-hmm. They throw him over a bridge, and he doesn't die on the fall. He dies because the clown comes out from under the bridge and drags him under.
Yikes.
So the 3 teenagers are pulled in for questioning. So in Stephen King's wonderful narrative way, you see what's going on inside of all of their brains and inside of all of the cops' brains, and nobody is particularly tolerant. They're
not really sympathetic. But I imagine like a lot of the violence that happens in this book is based in intolerance and in the hatred of like, or at least the fear of the town.
Well, I think some members. Of that does more heavily get revealed with the loser gang itself, right? They're called the loser gang?
They are called the loser gang.
Or the loser club?
They're called the losers.
The losers? Okay. Because they're all sort of the outcasts who have come together, correct?
Yeah, correct. They're all, when they're children, they're all in one way or another outcasts. You have Bill Denborough, who has a terrible stutter, which has only gotten worse since the gruesome death of his younger brother.
Played by my ultra crush Jonathan Brandis in the original television miniseries,
and played as a grown-up by Richard Thomas, who is best known as John Boy Walton on The Waltons.
Yeah. You can't go wrong. They're both cutie patooties.
They are sex objects. I'm not gonna lie. You also have Beverly Rogan, who do you have? What was her original name? Beverly
Oh, I don't remember.
Marsh. Beverly Marsh.
Oh, right.
Beverly Marsh, who is the daughter of an extremely dangerous, creepy, abusive man.
Mm-hmm.
You have Mike Hanlon, who's one of the few black kids in town, and there's and receives no small amount of bullying because of it. You have Ben Hanscom, who has a weight problem, and Eddie Kasprak, who has one of my favorite fixtures of Stephen King fiction, the terrible overbearing mother. His overbearing mother is not like a biblical nut like Carrie's overbearing mother. His overbearing mother is a total hypochondriac who thinks that everything is going to kill Eddie. So Eddie grows up as a terrible hypochondriac.
Oh, do you think she has that like because I haven't read the book, but yeah, I've watched both of the films multiple or the TV miniseries and the film multiple times now. Do you think she has like that Munchausen's?
I was just
totally
thinking
think
about
she has
that.
Munchausen by proxy.
Where like she medicates him because she thinks that can help make him better in her like weird psychosis, but that's actually the things that are keeping him as weak as he feels all the time.
100%.
Yeah.
Well,
And he does confront her on that.
He does. He does in the book. He doesn't really in the new movie. No, he does. He
Yeah,
does
he
in the new
does.
movie. It's just not as
And-
it's just not as
and
good. As
I was just in watching that was like, oh, her life is the worst.
yeah.
Like
her
a-
entire life is around this little boy.
Like, of all the parents that we see, she undoubtedly has a horrible time.
yeah.
And then did you mention Stanley?
I didn't mention Stanley. Stanley's notable because Stanley's outcast comes from he's Jewish, and we're given to understand he's probably the only Jew in town.
And they really, at least in the movie, they really lean into like, did you know that he's Jewish? I
They
assume
do.
that the same is true in the book, but it's also like, it's right around the time for his bar mitzvah. So
No, they really do. I really liked the new movie, although it did take a lot of departures from the book, and there were things that I missed. I thought they did a really good job capturing the primary colors essence of that portion of the book.
well, I enjoyed it, having not read the book.
Each of the
good.
kids like definitely like evokes that way that like you just like essentialize the kids in your life who stood out by that thing. So you had the Jewish kid, the black kid, the fat kid, the girl, stutter guy.
They are the Stephen King Breakfast Club.
Yeah,
100%.
exactly. And like it's really interesting to see them both work through those insecurities facing the rest of the town, and like how they also use those things to, like as their fighting weapons almost like later, like at least some of them.
Yeah, Stanley. So Stanley's a bird watcher in the book, and he uses his bird watching manual to fight off it at one point. Eddie has an inhaler, which we find out later is it's a placebo. It's just like water and menthol, and he uses that. There's Stephen King does a lot of. I feel like a lot of the time he has children fight with the things that children believe in.
My weakness is actually my strength.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So in the first cycle, the kids, they track it, they fight it, they mortally wound it, but they don't in fact kill it, and they all promise that they will come back, that if it comes back, they will all come back.
And then 27 years later,
What do you know? Adrian Mellon dies, and Mike is the only one who has stayed in town, become the town librarian, the town historian. He's the only one who remembers. Everybody else has moved away and moved on with their lives. And has
how
forgotten
could you
everything.
forget a fear-feeding clown?
If the fear-feeding clown wants to preserve himself by making you forget, then you forget.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's a thing that it can do?
Look, if we're going to have a book where we have an evil fear-feeding clown under the city, it's going to have magical amnesia powers.
Listen, I don't subscribe to that
I
notion.
feel like this is classic world building. This is world building
Also-
101.
Like that's what happens during trauma for a lot of, especially in children.
No, that's very
You
true.
You just don't remember it.
But I do love the like fuck it aspect sometime that world building
Oh yeah,
like,
totally.
does.
Like, but it makes an internal sense, because what I love about this book, what makes it my favorite, is that it becomes such a metaphor for the ways in which, as we grow up, we forget who we were as kids in a lot of ways, but we don't actually change and we remain the same.
Mhm.
All of these kids, when they become adults and they move up, they grow up and they move away, when we find them in the book, they're all in a lot of ways repeating the patterns they had when they were kids, in ways that they would not know, but we can kind of see.
Right.
Bill has married a woman who looks just like Beverly. Beverly has
course.
married a man who is just like her father. Eddie has married a woman who's just like his mother. Stanley is leading an exemplary, neat life. Stanley is the only one who doesn't come back because because they all receive phone calls from Mike saying, "It's back, will you come?" And they all say yes, except Stanley, who kills himself and writes "it" on the bathroom wall as he dies. I love this book.
That's fucked.
It's so fucked.
Another thing about Stanley that like never gets said in either of the movies
Mhm.
isn't Stanley the one that figures out that it is actually female?
I think he is.
And like I'm just like going off of like what I read on the Wikipedia.
Yeah,
Apparently,
yeah.
like he figures out that not only is it female, but it's actually also pregnant.
Yes, because they journey under the city. So they journey into the pipe. They find out that it lives in the sewers. There's like pages and pages. You'd hate it, Moby Dick. There's pages and pages and pages about the sewer system of Derry. And they go in to find it. And that's how they kind of find out that Pennywise, the clown, is a projection. Is throughout the book, it takes many forms. Pennywise is the most classic one, but sometimes there's this great passage where sometimes he's a werewolf and sometimes he's a mummy. He's a movie monster, like the movies they watch together. And they find it, and it is a giant pregnant spider. And there's a point at which the spider bursts and there are a bunch of baby spiders running around.
Oh,
and
boy.
This is in the adult section. One of them goes around stomping on spiders, and that section ends with him going, "I hope I got them all."
But Stanley doesn't go back because like he offs himself, right? He's
Yeah,
like, I cannot deal with this.
Yeah, and that creates doubt in the minds of the grown-ups who come back to Derry, and they come back and they remember each other, but they don't actually remember what they did. And throughout the grown-up section of the book, they have to remember.
Mhm. That's so wildly fucked. And also, strangely, I was thinking about this in many ways, or maybe this is only speaking for myself personally,
Yeah.
but we tend not to remember our victories as much as our failures. And so in some regard, like if like you'd remember the loss of like Bill is going to remember that he lost Georgie. Like that's a cataclysmic moment. But like when you win, you're just like, oh, I won. Like, that was great. And then you move on. But the person who lost is like, that fucking son. That's when the memory's like implanted. At least maybe. So maybe, I mean, I understand that it's just
Clown magic.
Right. Like we all know works like that. But there is something oddly,
or
I
maybe
guess,
like
human
those are the
about
moments that will rush back to you without you trying. Yeah, like, you know, it's
Am I crazy and alone in that one?
No, you're not alone in that one. I don't see it resonating in the novel, but I'm totally the same way. Like, I can remember an embarrassing thing that I said to that boy I liked in the 3rd grade, like that. But
when you get on the negative self-talk train,
Oh
like
my
that's when the floodgates open and you're like, oh, please. But anyway,
how do they ultimately kill it?
Well, the first time they mortally wound it with their toys, basically, with the things that they believe in, with their slingshots and inhalers and their bird books.
Because they're like basically by playing with confidence as their weapons, they're like cutting off the feed supply of fear, right?
Yeah, as long as they don't fear, they're okay. But then as adults,
there's an underlying thread in this book that's about the dichotomy between belief and fear, and that fear is or hope and fear rather, and that fear is a kind of negative belief. It exists because you believe in it, and so if you believe in the things that you have hope in, that can counteract the fear.
There is a movie I know. I think it might actually be, what was that awful Will Smith movie that Shyamalan directed?
After Earth.
After Earth.
Oh,
was
yeah.
it that
I
movie
didn't see
where
it.
Will Smith was like, fear is a choice, and there's like a monologue running through? I think it's just in the trailer. I did not watch the movie, but it's
I
not.
don't know, but if you think we're not going to look it up later, you're wrong.
Fear is a choice.
Sure.
Fear is a choice. Will Smith.
I will. It's really interesting to think about because like don't they have a harder time the second time around?
They do, because for one thing, Stanley's not there, so the circle's been broken once. For another thing, Mike. Oh my God. So their childhood bully. So in the first cycle, their childhood bullies follow them into the sewers, and 2 of them die, and one of them goes insane and is sent to Juniper Hill. Juniper Hill is one of those locations that pops up in a bunch of Stephen King novels. It's an asylum. And when it comes back 27 years later, he speaks to Crazy Butch and brings him and excuse me, not Butch, Henry Bowers, and gets him to break out of Juniper Hill and come back to Derry. And Henry almost kills Mike, almost kills Beverly, I think. And by the time they go back down into the sewers, I think there's only Bill, Beverly, Eddie, and Ben. And it's harder. It's harder because there's less of them. It's harder because they are not children anymore. And when you're a child, you believe in right and wrong because you know that they are there, and you know that they are muddy, but you know that they are true. And when you're an adult, you're morally gray and you have less faith in yourself. You know, when you're a child, you think you can live forever.
Mm-hmm.
When you're an adult, you know that you can't. It is much harder when they are kids.
Or much harder when they're adults.
Excuse me. Yes.
It's
when
harder
they're
for me to
adults.
shake fear now, I think, because I assume that I have more intelligence than I did as a kid. And so it's like, it's hard. Like fear was more overwhelming as a child because of how much I didn't know. I didn't have context for much. But now fear is hard. Like, it's harder to scare me. But once I am scared, it's a lot harder to get out of that fear.
And fear can manifest in very different ways. Adult fears are not necessarily singular, tangible things, but constructs and concepts like, will I forever be alone? Will I be able to support my family? Like, these are things that are going to weigh down on a person in a much more obscured way.
Oh, sure.
That, I mean, I don't know if the book deals with any of that.
Yeah,
but
it does.
Okay. If you're going in and, like you were saying, you immediately have a greater sense of the way that the world works, so that idealism is gone. The thought that, I'm just repeating what you've already said, let's try to sort this bad boy.
You know, I thought it would be a Gryffindor, but because so much of it is about bravery and Bill Denbrough is such a Harry Potter, and it feels so much like the repeated. It's got this kind of it's maybe it's just me. It's got this kind of Voldemort-y structure of this like this continued battle against the thing that wants fear to triumph. However, so much of it is also about loyalty and remembering your friends and being true to them and being true to who you are.
I was seeing things headed.
Yeah, I think this one might actually be a Hufflepuff.
It's absolutely.
It's one of those brave Hufflepuffs.
It's like the best Hufflepuff.
Oh, yeah.
It's the, like, if you are a Hufflepuff, this is like a book on the shelf in the common room of like, these are our people.
And with that, well, we only sorted two. I'm going to thank Abby Wilde and say we're going to be back next week for another episode where we'll be sorting hopefully more than 2, but we'll be sorting more Stephen King. Where can we be finding more of you on the internet, if anywhere?
You can find me on Twitter at Abby Wilde. That's Wilde with an E at the end. Similarly on Instagram. And I have a website at abbywilde.com.
Very good, very good. You can find more from me at Belated Media. You can find more from Reed Brice at That Dang Dingus, both on Twitter. You can follow us at sortinghat_pod, where we have polls and postings of our episodes that have come out.
Give us some feedback.
Please do.
Please come play with us.
We
all float. We all float on Twitter.
You're not invited to the next one, Reed.
Twitter's a sewer.
It is. It's a network of tubes.
All right, bye guys. Oh.